One chilly morning, David noticed his dog, Murphy, bringing home a strange rock from the woods behind their house. At first he laughed, thinking Murphy was just being playful, but as the days went by, Murphy kept returning with more of those odd-looking stones. Some were cracked, others looked burned, and a few had a strange shimmer beneath the dirt. It didn't feel like an ordinary game anymore. Curiosity began to grow inside the owner. One afternoon he decided to follow Murphy's trail into the forest to see where the dog was finding them. What he discovered, buried beneath the soil, wasn't just a pile of old rocks, it was something that would change everything he thought he knew. Join us as we uncover what David discovered with his dog. Murphy's mysterious trail of stones. Murphy, the golden Labrador, had a strange new hobby that left his owner David completely surprised. Lately, the dog had developed a deep fascination with rocks. Almost every day, Murphy would return from his favorite trail in the woods behind their Oregon home with something clutched carefully in his mouth. He would proudly drop it on the back step as if he had discovered buried treasure. At first, David thought it was just a funny phase. Murphy had always brought home random things like sticks, old shoes, and even a squirrel once. But rocks were new. And it wasn't just one or two. This week alone, the count had already reached 5. The first few didn't look special at all. They were just dirty stones covered in mud. But when David looked closer, he noticed something odd. The rocks weren't ordinary. One had a melted texture, rough on one side and smooth on the other, almost as if it had been shaped by fire. Another had veins of shiny material running through it, glinting faintly under the light. Some were heavy and jagged, while others looked strangely metallic. David felt a growing curiosity but didn't think much of it. He simply stacked them near his shed, planning to toss them away later. Then came the 11th one. This time, Murphy acted differently. Instead of quietly dropping it, the dog barked non-stop until David came outside. He sat proudly beside the new rock, tail wagging, eyes fixed on his owner as if waiting for him to notice something important. When David rinsed the mud off, he saw a reddish tint glowing faintly beneath the dirt. The surface had an unusual pattern that caught the sunlight beautifully. That was the first time David truly felt intrigued. The next day, he carried the strange rock to his neighbor Charlie, who loved tinkering with tools and knew a bit about geology. Charlie turned it over in his hands, studying it closely. He said it looked like something formed from melted metal, maybe waste material from an old workshop. That idea made David pause. The woods behind his house had always seemed quiet and untouched, but now he began to wonder what Murphy had actually found out there. Charlie was curious too. He offered to bring over his old metal detector the following weekend just to check the area. David laughed and agreed, though part of him couldn't shake the strange feeling that this was more than just a dog's playful discovery. By the end of the week, Murphy had gathered 15 rocks. Every morning, he dashed toward the same path through the trees, tail wagging with purpose, and returned exactly an hour later with another mysterious find. It became a routine that even David started to anticipate. Something about Murphy's determination felt different, almost like the dog was trying to lead him to something hidden. When Saturday arrived, Charlie showed up with his metal detector and a warm drink in hand, ready for an adventure. With a grin, he motioned toward the woods. Murphy barked eagerly, already heading toward his favorite trail. And just like that, the three of them set off, following the trail of the rock-loving dog, unaware that something far stranger might be waiting ahead. Would you want to know what they found? Keep watching. The hidden clues beneath the pines. Early the next morning, Murphy began scratching at the back door, eager to head out like he always did. But this time, David decided not to just let him go alone. He clipped on Murphy's leash, called Charlie, and together they followed the excited dog into the woods. The morning air was cool and quiet as they walked along the narrow deer trail that wound behind the shed. For about 20 minutes, Murphy trotted ahead happily, nose to the ground, until suddenly he started pulling hard on the leash. Then he stopped beside a thick patch of tangled bushes and began to dig frantically. Dirt flew everywhere as Murphy's paws worked faster. David and Charlie watched closely, curiosity rising. Within moments, The dog uncovered another rock and sat proudly beside it, tail wagging as if he had just uncovered something important. When David picked it up, he noticed that it was flat and had sharp, brittle edges, as though it had been broken off from something much bigger. Charlie switched on his old metal detector and waved it slowly over the rock. A soft beep broke the silence. The sound wasn't strong, but it was enough to suggest that something metallic was inside. Charlie guessed that it might contain iron or some kind of metal mix. They decided to check the area around the spot. As Charlie moved the detector in a slow circle, it gave faint beeps in a small 5-foot range. The two men got down on their knees and brushed away the moss and ferns. Beneath the damp ground, they uncovered small, rusted pieces of wire fencing, barely visible and tangled together. It was clear that something once stood there long ago. That night, David couldn't get the discovery out of his mind. Sleep wouldn't come, so he went outside, gathered all the rocks from the pile beside his shed, and carried them into the kitchen. Under the warm light, he began cleaning them one by one. As the mud washed away, strange patterns began to appear. One stone had faint parallel scratches across it, almost like something sharp had scraped its surface. Another had a narrow groove carved perfectly straight. It didn't look like a natural break at all. David's curiosity deepened. He turned on his laptop and started digging through online records about the area's history. Most of what he found was ordinary, but hidden in an old local forum, he stumbled across a short mention of a fire that happened in the late 1950s. It mentioned a cabin, but the details were sketchy. The thought sent a chill down his spine. 2 days later, Murphy returned from the woods with something even stranger, a broken piece of metal with faint stamped numbers on it. Though most of the digits were unreadable, David could clearly see the last 3. 557. That small detail made his heart race. The next morning, he called the county library and asked if they could find newspaper archives from that year. The librarian promised to check. Later that day, Charlie stopped by again to look at the rocks. He noticed the same thing David had seen. Some stones were partly melted together, like they had been exposed to extreme heat. They both exchanged a knowing look. A few days later, the librarian called back. Her voice confirmed what they had begun to suspect. There had been a terrible fire in that exact area back in August 1957, and it seemed Murphy's discoveries were slowly uncovering what was left of it, but in a way the world never expected. The forgotten fire, and the man who vanished. The librarian's voice trembled slightly as she shared what she had found. Decades ago, a man named Ernest Weller had owned a small cabin hidden deep in the woods beyond West Ridge. One summer night, a fire had swept through the forest and burned his cabin to the ground. Everything was lost. When rescuers arrived, they found only ashes. No trace of a body was ever discovered. David sat frozen in silence, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, trying to take in what he had just heard. When he finally managed to speak, he asked what had become of the man. The librarian explained that Ernest had been declared dead, though the case was never officially closed. Locals described him as a quiet man who rarely came into town. Some said he was a prospector, or maybe a collector, someone who spent his days hauling mysterious boxes in and out of the woods. The story continuously rang in David's mind all afternoon. Later that same day, Murphy returned from his usual adventure with yet another discovery in his mouth. But this one stood out from all the rest. It had a flat, smooth surface with a small chip on the side that revealed a faint silver shimmer inside. It didn't look like a simple rock. It looked like a piece of something valuable that had been broken apart. Curious, David took a clear photo and posted it on an online group for rock collectors, hoping for answers. Within a few hours, someone replied, saying it wasn't just an ordinary stone. They believed it looked like a raw garnet matrix, something that could actually be worth a lot of money. Excitement and confusion filled David's mind. Could this really be connected to the man who lived there long ago? He quickly called Charlie and told him what he'd learned. Charlie arrived that evening with his metal detector, ready to search again. This time, they decided to move further into the woods, expanding their search area. About 15 yards from where Murphy usually dug, they discovered a dark patch of soil beneath layers of dead leaves. When they brushed it aside, the ground below was scorched black, and mixed within it were tiny fragments of wood, charred, fragile, and turned to ash. It looked exactly like the remains of something that had burned down. Charlie guessed they had found what was left of the old cabin. As they kept digging, they uncovered small items buried in the dirt. There were bent, rusted nails, cracked pieces of pottery, and the deformed metal frame of what seemed to be an old camping lantern. Every piece felt like a silent clue from the past. The deeper they dug, the more they realized how much the fire had destroyed. No bones appeared, only blackened fragments scattered through the soil. Murphy, however, wasn't done. He stayed close to a particular spot near the tree line, sniffing and pawing at the ground as though he could sense something deeper hidden below. No matter how much David called him away, the dog returned to that same stretch every time, determined to uncover whatever was left. The next morning, David went back to the library, needing to know more. The librarian was waiting for him with an old, faded newspaper clipping. It was from August 1957, its title reading about a trapper who had vanished after a cabin fire. No remains were ever found. Below the article was a grainy black and white photograph of Ernest Weller himself standing beside a small crate filled with what looked like stones, the same kind Murphy had been bringing home one by one. David couldn't stop staring at the old newspaper photo. When he zoomed in on his phone, something inside him froze. The stones in Ernest Weller's crate looked exactly like the strange rocks Murphy had been dragging home day after day. They had the same dull shapes, the same rough texture, the same odd shimmer hidden under the dirt. His curiosity took over completely. As soon as he got home, he grabbed a hammer and screwdriver, picked one of the larger stones from the pile, and split it open on the kitchen counter. The moment the rock cracked, a faint sparkle caught his eye. Beneath its rough shell was a deep red glow, rich and alive under the light. It wasn't just a rock, it was something precious. He quickly searched online, comparing images, and what he found left him stunned. The stone had all the signs of raw garnet, dense and vibrant, unpolished but undeniably beautiful. Excitement rushed through him. He cleaned a few more pieces, brushing off layers of dried mud. Some had strange markings, fine lines carved into the surface, like the marks left by small tools or chisels. That night, he sent an email to a geologist at a nearby university, attaching clear photos of the stones. 2 days later, he received a reply that made his heart skip. The expert confirmed that the samples seemed to contain garnet and possibly corundum, a mineral linked to sapphires and rubies. One fragment, the geologist said, might even be a low-grade ruby, though proper lab testing would be needed to confirm. That was all David needed to hear. He and Charlie packed better tools and went back into the woods. Murphy led them once again to the same area he had been obsessed with. They started digging more carefully this time, forming a small trench where the detector had beeped before. Only a foot below the surface, Charlie's shovel struck something hard, and what they found thrilled everyone. The real truth and aftermath. When David brushed the dirt away, something metallic caught his eye. Buried beneath years of soil was an old metal box, rusty and fragile, like it had been sleeping underground for ages. The lock was almost gone, eaten away by time. Carefully, David opened it, expecting to see old coins or useless junk, but what he found made his hands tremble. Inside, wrapped in pieces of decayed cloth, were dozens of rough, colourful stones that glimmered faintly in the sunlight. His dog, Murphy, tilted his head, staring as if he understood how special this moment was. That night, David lay awake, his mind replaying the scene, the mysterious box, the sparkling stones, and the story of the strange man who had once owned this land. The next morning, he couldn't resist going back. With Murphy leading the way, they returned to the same spot in the woods. The dog ran ahead, stopping where they had dug before, pawing eagerly at the earth. When David followed his lead and brushed the dirt aside again, his fingers touched something hard, a larger metal lid. It belonged to a wooden crate buried deeper. He dug it out slowly, trying not to damage anything. Inside were bundles tied with old strings. When he untied one, a handful of shining gems rolled into his palm, bright reds, yellows, and greens. They weren't simple stones, they were real gemstones. Garnets, beryls, and peridots glittered softly in the morning light. That was when it hit him. Ernest Weller, the man who used to live here and was known as a quiet loner, hadn't been hiding from people at all. He had been secretly digging up gemstones. Curious to know more, David took one of the gems to a local jeweler, pretending he had just found it while hiking. The jeweler's eyes widened when he examined it. It wasn't just a random rock, it was a true garnet, almost as valuable as a ruby. He wanted to buy it immediately, but David refused. It wasn't about making money. He wanted to understand the mystery behind it all, and the loyal dog who had somehow led him to it. That evening, David laid out every rock Murphy had ever found, 33 in total. When he marked each spot on a map, he noticed something strange. The points formed a rough circle around the place where Ernest's cabin had once stood. Murphy had been tracing the forgotten footsteps of a man long gone without even knowing it. Before long, word spread quietly through their small Oregon town. People whispered about the dog who found treasure. Wanting to handle things properly, David informed the local authorities. Soon, an archaeological team came to examine the site. They worked for days, digging through ashes and soil until they found proof of what had happened years ago. Beneath the ground were the remains of a burned cabin, pieces of wood, melted nails, and personal items like a belt buckle, a broken coffee pot, and a half-burned notebook. Although most pages were damaged, a few words stood out like stones, ridge, finish, next week. Those clues revealed the truth. Ernest had spent years collecting gemstones in secret, but a fire ended his life before he could share his discovery. When the investigation ended, David was allowed to keep a few of the gems Murphy had found. The rest, along with the old crate, were given to the local museum. His only request was that the exhibit be named after the dog who started it all, Murphy's discovery. Months later, the museum opened its doors to the public. Inside a glass case sat the first red stone Murphy had ever brought home, surrounded by photos of the burned cabin. Visitors came from nearby towns just to see it, and children smiled at the picture of the happy Labrador who had become a little town hero. One afternoon, David got a call that brought the story full circle. A man named Matthew Weller had read about the discovery online. He said he was Ernest's grandson. His grandfather had disappeared in the 1950s after cutting ties with his family. For decades, Ernest Weller's family never knew what became of him. But Murphy's discovery finally gave them answers. When Ernest's grandson Matthew visited the site, he brought an old letter Ernest had written before disappearing. In it, Ernest explained he had hidden the gemstones near the ridge where pine roots cracked through rock and wished that some remain buried, believing they belonged to the land. The message moved David deeply. The next morning, he buried a few gems beneath a tree root, the same place the first box was found, while Murphy watched quietly. Later, David used part of the gem's worth to create a small scholarship in Ernest's name, helping students study nature and geology. From then on, Murphy still walked the forest trail every week, but never dug up another stone, as if he knew the mystery was solved and his job was finally done. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.